Hello everyone and welcome to Classic Gamer 74. I'm your host Anthony Gamer and I'm Mumford. Today we're going to be discussing the Commodore 64 computer as we continue our series on classic computers. Today we're going to be discussing several aspects of the Commodore 64 computer, as well as I'll show you some of the great games. Oh yeah, that's one thing I love about the Commodore 64 is all the games, and that's one thing that we're going to talk about is some of the misconceptions that people have about this legendary computer.
Alright, so let's get into a little bit of the history. The Commodore 64, also known as the C64 or the CBM 64, is an 8-bit home computer introduced in January 1982 by Commodore International. It has been listed in the Guinness World Records as the highest-selling single computer model of all time, with independent estimates placing the number sold between 10 and 17 million units. At the start, when the Commodore computer was released in August of 1982, it cost about $595, which is equivalent to $1,576 today. The name itself came from the amount of RAM memory that it had. The CPU itself was MOS Technology 6510/8500, and the speed was at 1.023 megahertz for the NTSC version and 0.985 megahertz for the PAL version. Alright, so let's get into the origin story here, and this information was given to me by a very good friend of the channel, Carl's son, a gentleman on Atari Age forums who is a connoisseur of anything Commodore 64. Alright, now Commodore were working on a next model of the home computer after the VIC-20, as you see in this picture here. And both were developing a 40-column version of that and a completely new chipset in the Japan IIRC, more or less intended for gaming purposes. The prototypes of the VIC-2 and SID were ready by November 1981, and already in January 1982, the upcoming C64 was announced, scrapping the 40-column VIC-20. Okay, to test the waters, they intended to release the Commodore Max in Japan. You see the picture right there. Many web pages incorrectly claim it was launched long before the C64, while in reality, Commodore put an order for the Max keyboards in May 1982, but those didn't arrive for assembly until December and had a good 15,000 faulty units. In the meantime, the C64 was released in the U.S. in July-August 1982, so while Commodore may have intended to get the Max out earlier, it practically didn't happen. Also, with the upcoming price cuts, there never was much of a market, even in Japan, for the Max, so it only lasted a short while into 1983. For a substantial period between 1983 and 1986, the Commodore 64 had between 30 and 40% share of the U.S. market and 2 million units sold per year, outselling IBM PC compatibles, Apple computers, and the Atari 8-bit family of computers. Part of the Commodore 64's success was its sale in regular retail stores instead of only electronics or computer hobbyist specialty stores. I remember as a boy that you would find Commodore 64 computers and their games available in such stores as service merchandise. Boy, that's a blast from the past. Oh yeah. And I remember that really cool room they had where they had all the electronic stuff and everything, and you could buy it there, as opposed to like with Apple computers, you had to go to a special retailer to get those. The Commodore 64 was discontinued in April of 1994. However, there were problems earlier that almost did ruin the company. In 1983, Commodore made net profits. Actually, unfortunately, the board of directors thought that company money was their own, so they used that money to buy airplanes and yachts, handing out bonuses and other things like that, which caused the founder of the company, Jack Tramiel, to leave in January 1984. Unfortunately, to the outside world, they pretty much claim that he was fired from his own company, but his family insists that he left on his own fruition, and he became the CEO of Atari not long after that.
One of the biggest misconceptions that people have about the Commodore 64 computer is that it was strictly a gaming computer only. And unfortunately, that led a lot of parents, including mine, to not purchase a Commodore 64 computer when we were in the market for a home computer. That's right. Even though it was known for having quite a few games, it still had everything else that its computer competitors had. Boy, that was a mouthful. Yeah, it was. Exactly.
Commodore 64 had a couple different word processors. One is the Bank Street Writer, which unfortunately I couldn't get to work. And another one is this one called VisaWrite. VisaWrite was a word processing program that was also available for other computers, but people that I've talked to have always said that this was their go-to word processing program for the Commodore 64 computer. It was very user-friendly. You could do pretty much everything you can do on most word processors. Set margins, set the spacing, and it would, you could print it up. The one key thing to remember is that you had to have a second diskette. Why is that? Well, most people that had Commodore 64 computers had 2 disk drives anyway, but you would need the second disk drive to save on. Remember, back in those days, you didn't save on the hard drive. And next up we have SpeedScript. As you can see, it had quite a few interesting add-ons to it as well. SpeedScript reminds me a lot of what would later become Microsoft Word, or, heaven forbid, WordPerfect. So there were some really cool opportunities for this computer to be used not just for gaming, but for doing homework and for writing as well. And of course, if you were a computer manufacturer back in the 80s and 90s and even into the 2000s, you better have your own version of Print Shop. Oh yeah, that nothing says the 80s like Print Shop. I mean, we used to just have so much fun with it, making cards, signs, and trying to make banners, but most of the time the teachers would get mad if you wasted that much paper. But oh yeah, I'm sure several of our viewers on here have some really cool memories based in Print Shop. And yes, it was available for just about every computer back in the day.
Although I will say that truly the Commodore 64 computer had probably more games than any other computer known to man. Although the Apple IIe computer does come kind of close. That's right. A lot of the arcade games were made for the Apple IIe computer, as well as the Commodore. Right. So why is it the Apple IIe computer didn't have the same reputation of being a gaming computer? The main reason for that is because the Commodore 64 computers were not placed in schools. Back in the early 80s, as I discussed in a previous episode on the Sunburst Edutainment games, Apple Corporation put several computers in every school. So they were very much touted as a learning tool, which they were. And of course, the Commodore 64 computer as well was a learning tool, as it had much of the same software that Apple II had. However, there were a lot of games that were released for the Commodore 64 computer, and many of these games were of much better quality than you would find those games that had been released for the Apple IIe and for MS-DOS. So, before we get out of here, here's some of my personal favorite games for the Commodore 64 computer.
And first we have Vixen. This is a platformer game in which you take on the role of Vixen, I guess, and she is the last human on the planet Granith, which is now being ruled by a strange race of dinosaurs. She was raised by foxes and intends to follow through on a promise she made to her elders to wipe out the dinosaurs and restore the planet for humanity. If you are into games with a female protagonist, you're going to love this one. And next up, from 1982, we have Radar Rat Race. This was published by Commodore. In this game, you take on the role of a blue mouse that has to search for cheese in a labyrinth within a certain time. To make it harder, you have to contend with these red mice who are wanting to kill you, as well as black cats. But you can actually shoot them with a star screen, which does leave them behind you for a while, as you are able to go through this maze and try to collect as much cheese as possible. And our next game is one that I'd heard about many years ago from a friend, Ron, who was also a Commodore man, and he had told me about this game, and I didn't believe it existed. I thought he was just telling stories, but it is real. It's called Bozo's Night Out, and it was programmed by Tony Gibson. In this game, you have to get Bozo home safely with as many pints as he can drink. There are 3 different paths to take: the left path, the right path, or through the park. Once you safely get him home, you get 5 pints, and you have to do this again the next night. As the game goes on, it gets harder for him to walk in a straight line. If he gets injured or captured by the police, he loses 1 to 5 points. Interesting game to say the least, a lot of fun, and definitely one you've got to try. Alright, and next we have 3D B. Yeah, B with 3 E's, correct. In this one, you are this helicopter pilot, and you are trying to save your city from these extraterrestrial giant bees that are trying to take over the city. Pretty cool shooter game, very original, I have to say. I've never heard of anything like it. Really a lot of fun. Once you get the hang of the aiming, the game is pretty much unbeatable. And our final game for today is a game that just screams Commodore 64, and that is Racing Destruction Set. If you are into racing games and crashing games and trying to crash games, this game is for you. You can race an opponent on a pre-constructed racetrack, create your own. No matter what you do, these cars crash and they keep right on racing. So, as I said, this is a game that is definitely a Commodore 64 game. Yeah, every time you ask someone that I personally, and you ask them about a Commodore 64 game, probably one of the first games they talk about is this one. In next week's episode, we are going to have our 150th episode. That's correct, 150 episodes so far. So good. So we're going to share some memories, have some bonus footage, have some discussions, and we're going to have a Q&A session. So if you have any questions you'd like to ask me, let us know in the comments section below. Also hit me up on my various social media platforms. And
well, that brings us to the end of another episode of Classic Gamer 74. I really hope you all enjoyed it. Oh, I sure did. I learned something. Well, that's good. As long as you learn something, that's what's important. Yep. And if you did like today's episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already. And don't forget to click the little bell icon down there so you'll be notified when I upload new episodes. Also, feel free to share some of your memories of your Commodore 64 computer days. Do you still have it? If not, do you have an emulator? Or have you purchased that new plug-and-play Commodore 64 computer? Let me know about it in the comments section below. I'd love to hear what you have to say, and it's always fun to share memories. Well, until next time, I am Anthony Gamer, and I'm Mumford, and we will see you all in the next episode. Until then, be strong, be safe, be happy and healthy, and above all, take care of each other and be kind to each other. See you guys soon. Bye. Bye, everyone.